I'm here to talk a little bit about how we actually build a mindset for creating successful technological businesses and products, right? So yesterday, just like Oppo mentioned at the beginning of today's session, we heard a lot of cool stories from people on what kind of technologies are relevant, right? So those were a few very relevant, very useful indications of what kind of problems we should be solving, right? So we don't waste our time solving problems that are already solved or that have been done sufficiently already or are not interesting enough. But today I would like to talk a little bit more on how do we actually get there? How do we go from being good at engineering, and you'll see that we are actually already pretty good at it, towards being good at creating solutions, products, and businesses in the Balkans, right? Because that's where we are. So speaking of which, I'm going to continue the trend here on stage. I'm going to ask you questions. How many people live in the Balkans? Who knows that? You just yell it out. You don't have to raise your hand. 50 million? 60? Anyone gives less or more? No? You're very close, 48, right? The count is between 45 and 50, because in some countries, actually in Kosovo, no one actually knows how many people live. We sort of know that it's sort of 2 million. But it's around 48 million, right? If you think about it, 48 million people is a pretty significant amount, right? It's bigger than Spain. Spain is 40. It's bigger than Poland, which is also 40. Poland is the largest country and economy in Central Eastern Europe, right? It's more than half of Germany, more than half of Turkey. And this region historically has much more in common than it has, differences between itself, as we know. So keep that in mind, right? It's actually pretty big economical power that hasn't been realized yet in many ways. Now, let's take a look at the kind of inventions that came from this region that we use every day, right? So this is, obviously you guys know who this is. This is Nikola Tesla. The Serbs and Croats are still fighting over whether he is theirs. I was at Zagreb University a couple of months ago, and they had like the statue of Nikola Tesla, but if you go to Belgrade University, you'll see one there as well, and it's like Serbian inventor. Funny thing is he was actually American, right? So he moved to the US as a young guy, and all the significant stuff that he did, working as today we would say co-founder of Thomas Edison, and all the, the big stuff that he developed but actually didn't realize towards the end of his life was in the US. But here in this region, right, in the Balkans, there's a lot of stuff that was actually developed that is interesting. Speedometer, for instance. I didn't know that. I just found out recently that the predecessor of the speedometer, the velocimeter, as it was called, was actually developed by a Croatian guy who was working in, he was from Istria, was working in Italy, because that was Italy at the time, in Trieste. And he patented and showed it at the Paris World Expo in 1889, the one where the Eiffel Tower was built for. And from there on, I mean, that invention obviously was pretty useful in the 20th century. Zero motion point. This is the science behind humanoid robotics, right? So the ability to teach a machine to move like a human, which nowadays we consider it pretty straightforward. That was actually 1960s research and invention by a Serbian professor in Yugoslavia, in Belgrade. Miomir Vikubratovic was his name. That led actually to humanoid robots, which was then perfected by many companies like Honda. The fastest electric car in the world, right? Some of you in this room know this company. Anyone know this car? You know it? There are people who don't know about the fastest electric car in the world. It's a Croatian invention product, actually. So this is a company just outside of Zagreb, in a small suburb of Zagreb called Sveta Nedelja. It's a company of about 150 people. It was founded from the ground up by a guy and a couple of co-founders in 2008. It's called Rimac Automobili. And they created this car, which they already sold a couple of them. They're obviously hand-built. They cost $1 million each. It goes from not to 100 kilometers an hour in less than 3 seconds. And it's actually the fastest car with whatever, 200, 300 kilometers an hour. Pretty cool thing. And this is made right here in the Balkans. It's actually me and my buddy Mike sitting there behind it. It's a real photo. It's not from the internet. And if you look at it, there's actually many more inventions that come from the Balkans, right? So the fountain pen was invented in Romania. Bulgarians, apparently, discovered the process of separating photons, which is the technology behind photocopiers, right? So Xerox created the photocopier. Even in many countries, the device is called Xerox. But it was a Bulgarian invention, which was created, patented in the 1930s, that led the way to that. Now, you guys tell me, I don't know if this is true. Some people told me it's an urban legend, but apparently Albanians invented anti-rust paint. There's this little story about Albanians painting ships. At some point, they started adding corrosive materials, rust, basically, into the paint. Figured out that actually helps to protect the steel against rusting, right? So that's an Albanian invention. I tried to verify that. I couldn't. So it might be an urban legend, but I really hope it's true because it's pretty cool. And you know, if you look at it, at all these technological advances that came from this region, it's actually not surprising if you look at the statistics of technology education. So the United States government has this really cool thing, which is called the National Center for Education Statistics. NSIA is the name of the survey. It's done every 2 or 3 years. What they do is they compare the results in various disciplines like math, science, but also humanitarian disciplines of high school students in the U.S. They compare them to benchmarks all over the world, and it's a pretty cool thing if you know statistics, because it's pretty hard to objectivate data. And if you look at that, if you look at that lineup of countries, this is not the full list. This is just the list starting from the U.S. down. It's pretty cool because what you see is there's U.S. right. Why is that relevant? Because America is obviously probably the most powerful tech society in the world. So their kids' progress at school is pretty relevant to understanding, how that comes about. If you look down on the list, you see a bunch of Eastern European countries. There's Lithuania on the 3rd place. Croatia is up there. We have Bulgaria, Serbia, Romania, Montenegro. They're not considerably far down on the list compared to the United States. There are many, many more countries in other regions in the world that are much more further down. If you want to know, the ones that are further up on the list are actually Western European countries mostly. This is cool. However, if you look at the economy side of things, it's different, right? So if you look at, basically, if we, objectivate the data and we look at how, that progress at school of children trickles down into the economy, if you look at the GDP per capita numbers, it's not that cool, right? So a couple of countries that are right there, even above Croatia or even slightly below Croatia, I wanted to say, right up there on that previous list, like Sweden, like Israel, they're much further advanced in their GDP per capita than countries in the Balkans, right? They're in their, in the top 30, top 40. Croatia, which was pretty high up that list, as you saw, is, number 58, and the other ones are further down. So we have a problem here, right? We're good at developing technology, apparently, but we're not that very good in turning that into business, into money. And that's weird because historically, the Balkans have actually given the world a lot, right? So it was a pretty cool research that I did on looking what kind of stuff comes from the Balkans. White cheese, known as feta cheese in the world, mostly because the Greeks were very good at marketing it, but it's of course the same pretty much cheese as you have in Kosovo, in Bulgaria, in Serbia. Yogurt, which the people all over the world, especially in the U.S. and Asia, love. It's a product that was created during the Ottoman rule in what is today Bulgaria and Macedonia. Iron armor, the Bulgarian, not Bulgarian, Eastern European, Balkan fighters back in the day were actually the first ones to figure out how to create armored plates and put them on their bodies when they were fighting. So this is all kind of stuff that, the world would be different had it not been invented, and it was from the Balkans. But if we look at, 20th, 21st century products, companies, we see very, very little of that, coming out of the Balkans. And the question is why? Pretty puzzling. I've actually spent, the last 4 years trying to understand that question, trying to answer it for myself, and seeing how we can do something about it. I've done a lot of this kind of stuff, standing on stages and talking to entrepreneurs, mentoring, organizing workshops, conferences, seminars. When I moved to Bulgaria after founding, running, and selling my first company in the Netherlands, I ended up creating an accelerator program, which was at that time the biggest accelerator program in Eastern Europe, and a seed fund attached to it with European money to actually help entrepreneurs from the whole region, create startups that could actually get to the next level, get some success. And it's been, the question that I've always tried to answer for myself is, and this is a question relevant for any economy, is what are people good at here, right? What are people at the Balkans actually really, really good in? And I thought along about it, and the answer is, to me, and I don't know if this is, offensive or not, it's actually good in many ways, is that people are generally very good at having a good time, right? People are very good in having a great time, in partying, in eating, drinking, and just enjoying themselves. Look at Prizren. It's my first time in this city. I've been to Kosovo a number of times, but first time in Prizren. If you walk around the town, 60, 70, maybe more % of the businesses are hospitality, food, small retail. You can buy cigarettes and Coke and all that stuff. That is the essence of the economy, basically. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Actually, when I moved to Bulgaria, to Eastern Europe, to Balkans, one of the reasons I wanted to do that is because the life was so much more fun than in Amsterdam, where it's cold and raining and stuff is expensive and everyone is pretty grumpy. So it's a good thing, but the problem is that if you focus on this kind of stuff, right, you learn to focus on easy things, if it can be put that way, right? We don't have a culture in the Balkans of focusing on hard stuff, right? Solving complicated problems. The reason is, it carries a lot of risk. And in the Balkans, historically, it has developed in such a way that taking risks is not something that people like to do, right, for various reasons. Solving hard problems inevitably means not actually knowing what you're doing in a way, right? Because when you start solving a hard problem, usually what happens, and you can track, the history of many great inventions, great companies, great businesses, they start solving one problem and then they figure out something else is wrong and they start solving that, and then they come to a solution that they never expected when they started, right? Famous example is how Columbus discovered America, right? He just wanted to find a cheap way to get pepper from Indonesia to Europe. Ended up discovering America. It was a pretty good find, actually. So another thing that we have in the Balkans that I've noticed, and this is an interesting topic today specifically here at DOKU, because I saw that one of the punchlines of the conference, or one of the, not DOKU, but DOKUFest actually, one of the topics is ending the isolation of Kosovo, right? So there are a couple of posters that you can see downtown here in Prizren talking about that it's time for Kosovo to stop being isolated, right? It's one of the last countries in Europe where people actually need a visa to travel to Germany or to other Schengen states. What I've noticed, and this is a find that, that is puzzling actually in a way, is that this freedom to travel, in Bulgaria, for instance, which obtained it some years ago, Serbia got it, I think, like last year, Macedonia got it a couple years ago. What it means is when the border opens up, the smartest people leave, right? You can track this down, to the statistics of most countries in the Balkans. Kosovo, of course, is, because of the history, a slight exception. People are, probably coming back more here than leaving at this moment. But in countries like Bulgaria or Romania or Serbia, their populations decrease with a couple of million each, and usually you will see that those couple of million are actually the smarter, better paid, more ambitious people. So once you get what you really, really want in Kosovo, right, the ability to travel without a visa, unless you do something about it, you will see that a lot of smart people will start leaving. Not that they can't leave today, but it's much easier to do so when you can just get on a plane and never come back, right? So that's one of the problems, together with winning mindset. And of course, what happens is, if you take the smart people out, that what stays behind is this kind of business people, right? Now, this is perhaps a bit provocative, right? But we all know this is true, right? We all know that when we think about business in the Balkans, this is kind of the mental image that most people, your parents probably, come up with. Don't do business, get a normal job. Don't end up like these guys. That is a serious problem. If we compare that to Silicon Valley, this is, first of all, maybe why do we compare to Silicon Valley? I know that some of the talks at this conference were very much anti-Silicon Valley culture. The reason Silicon Valley is interesting because it is objectively the society that has the biggest success in creating technological businesses nowadays, right? Those places have been elsewhere before, but Silicon Valley is a very interesting experiment of how only in the frame of a couple of decades, out of if you read the history, many books and articles have been written about it. It was a very backward region, orange groves, farms, pretty poor area, how only in like 60 or 70 years, or even less, it has become, the vantage of technological development in the world. So what kind of lessons can we learn from there? If you look at what has shaped the culture in Silicon Valley, there are many things, but there are kind of two factors that really stand out. First of all, the culture of creating technological businesses as we know them today emanates from the culture of academic relationships, right? So it's no wonder how Silicon Valley grew around a university, Stanford University, and how a lot of the stuff that was happening there, which led to that university being very good, was research from other universities that were transferred there for certain political or economical reasons. Now, at universities, I guess everywhere in the world, but especially at large good campuses in the U.S., the culture is one of sharing, one of tinkering, one of playing around, working together on problems, very often not knowing exactly what you're solving or figuring it out as you go. And then when you have something that works, that's when you actually create a business around it, not before. Another thing that has been very, very key in in the development of Silicon Valley is diversity, right? One can argue whether it's always the case, but generally the culture of openness, of inclusivity has been, has always been encouraged, right? So you see, diversity among, ethnical diversity, age diversity, gender diversity. Those things are very important. And a lot of the, if you look today at a lot of the developments, globally, or at least on U.S. political level, pushing that diversity into the mainstream, they actually are either directly coming from Silicon Valley, or they are very much pushed by the community there, right? So if you talk about stuff like gay rights, stuff like the fight against misogyny, right, women's rights, a lot of that power is actually focused there, and it's for a reason, right? It is very much connected to to the success rate of tech businesses, however strange that may sound. Business, however, is very different, right? It has nothing to do with, being cool about all kinds of different, diverse people, about, having an academic exchange of ideas. Businesses like this, Donald Trump, that's business, Die hard, hard as nails. That's the cultural reference for business. It's actually very different than the culture of, the Silicon Valley culture of openness and, it's okay to fail fast, funny, playful offices. It's very different. Gordon Gekko, we're into movies anyways here. Another very prime example of what a successful businessman is, right? And if you track a lot of the news, a lot of the publicity coming out of Silicon Valley today, a lot of the negative, signals that you hear about what's going on there, it has a lot to do with this world encroaching on the world of, engineers playing around and creating stuff, right? So business, in the traditional sense of the word, and the point in business where tech businesses are, becoming successful, they're actually feuding together. So what I'm trying to say is that when we want to learn business, we need to learn the right kind of business and not this kind of business. In the Balkans, of course, there's no shortage of hardball, right? So in the Balkans, this problem is actually extra hard because in the Balkans, when you say, stuff is like hard as nails, you don't even think about Donald Trump. This is the kind of images that comes to force, right? Many of you know who this is. Those who don't, I guess you don't have to. So, putting it all together, in the Balkans, you have a lot of tech talent. Right. This is no secret. This is a company that actually I was lucky enough to be a part of the investment team of. VetCloud from Serbia, great guys. They're building a solution for vet businesses, taking veterinary practices online. Very kind of diverse team. They're all Serbians, but from different religious and ethnical backgrounds. Really cool guys. What we don't have is business and product skills. Right. This is one of the traditional problems in the Balkans. So we have a lot of engineers, but many of them end up actually working for someone else, right? So you have a lot of outsourcing companies nowadays. In the old days, you had factories where engineers worked, but very, very little product and business skills. So there's very little knowledge locally on how do you take a technological development or a technology and spin that out into a business. And the reason for that is twofold. One of it is what we already mentioned. There is no culture of being, inquisitive, being exploratory. The other thing is simply that this is a region of very, very small markets, right? So there is very little knowledge on how do you actually push a product initially onto the market. So those are the things we need to solve. There's some stats here. Because of the time, I won't go into them. Generally, this is kind of the big picture we need to solve, right? We need to help engineers become better business people. We need to lose the image of engineer being guys like this, really smart guys, basically poor and weird and geeky, not successful, and leadership figures as we would like them to see. So not this kind of stuff, definitely. Now, a couple of things that we can get inspired with from Silicon Valley and other successful tech communities. We need to learn to fail. This has been repeated many times, but it still needs repeating because we're still not there. Learning to fail in a good way. So not making a cult out of failure, right? Because that is bad. I've seen a lot, every time we mention failure in the Balkans, a lot of people go like, yeah, okay, I failed. That's good, right? Well, it's not something you should be proud of. It's a part of the process, right? You should be not failing. You should be playing around with stuff. And if it doesn't work, you continue. It's about sharing, right? I've noticed this, ever since I moved to Bulgaria and started traveling around the region. It's really hard to get honest feedback from people in the Balkans. You guys all know this is part of the culture, right? Everyone is like thinking the one thing, saying the other thing, doing the third thing, right? And it's all about like, being cool and playing cool. And, if things don't work, you spin a story around it. We need to share more because if we don't do that, we don't learn from each other's mistakes. And, you in life, from the moment you're a little baby, you actually learn more from other people's mistakes than your own because, you wouldn't be around if you did. So that is very important, learning to share. And it's forcing yourself to do that even if people laugh at you, right? So it's pretty hard. And finally, I've mentioned this word a couple of times already, tinkering, right? So we need to start getting into a culture where we play around with technology and we don't immediately think about the business that can come out of it, but the solutions that you can build with it. And then once something works, a prototype, a minimum viable product if you want it in startup terms, that's when you start looking at the business side of things. So what can we learn? This is a pretty cool photo of, you guys probably know it. It's Singapore. Today is a very special day. Singapore turned 50 today. So exactly 50 years ago, Singapore looked like this. This was a photo from 1964, 51 years ago. This is Marina Bay in Singapore. Singapore in the 60s was like Kosovo today. It was pretty poor, small, surrounded by big countries that didn't care about it, right? This is Singapore today, right? In 50 years, that country has made amazing progress, and it's something a small country with no resources can actually do, right? So there's no reason to believe that Kosovo or Macedonia or Serbia or whatever other small country cannot do this. One of the things, so here are a couple of ideas that I would just like to leave you guys with. Some of these things have to be done by governments. Some things can be done by private companies, but those things need to be done in order to create a place where technology businesses can actually incubate, can actually start growing. So one of the first things we need to do is to help to get the best entrepreneurs from the region, help them get them into the markets. It could be Silicon Valley. It's not always. There are a bunch of organizations in Silicon Valley that actually are targeted at helping entrepreneurs from regions that are further behind to learn stuff. There is Plug and Play Center, there is an SGSV, there are many, many others where you can actually, as a local government or a local corporation, agree to pay them some money and send some of the brightest kids from here over there. And that has to happen more, I believe. Retain the smart people, right? This is a program that I saw work in Lithuania, which is a really cool program. What they have there, it's a government traineeship where the best graduates of the best universities that have the Lithuanian passport, they're Lithuanians basically, they're invited by the government. There is like a whole selection process to work for the ministry or whatever agency for a limited period of time, getting paid the kind of pay they would get at a London or New York investment bank. And this really helped retaining a lot of the smart people, because once they graduate at Oxford or Harvard, they won't come back to Lithuania to work there because they can get much better job offers in New York or London. But it is key for a society to get those people back, and it costs some money. But for a government, really, like to spend maybe $1, $2, $3 million a year on getting the best local talent back into the ecosystem is priceless, right? Because for that money, what can you do? You can build some more buildings, right? You can build a bridge or something. Who needs that if you don't have smart people to use it? So this is pretty important. Attracting talent to the region. I don't know, some of you guys probably know Startup Chile. That's an amazing program. The Chilean government basically said, okay, we have a lot of entrepreneurs, but they don't know how to build startups. Why don't we get the best startups that we can find and get them to Chile? Give them some money so they spend 6 months, maybe a year in Chile. And that program worked very well. I know a lot of people, many of my friends that went through this program. The cool thing is that they got a great experience out of it, going to Chile and working with local people. But the Chilean startup ecosystem really progressed. There are a couple of cool companies that came out of Chile after that started working, and they're already in their like 4th or 5th year right now. Again, doesn't cost much money. Chile spent $10 million on this, right? It's almost nothing for a country, but it can really, really change the landscape. Getting people that know what they're doing into your economy. Bringing Silicon Valley experts or experts from other countries locally. Same story. I have personal experience. I do a lot of events, and I can tell you that every time I tell my friends in in London and San Francisco and places like that, like, hey, I'm doing a seminar. Some people here have been to some of my seminars in Macedonia last 2 months ago. Why don't you guys come over to Macedonia? We're going to sit in a retreat in a mountain and work with startups with 20, 25 founders, take their stuff apart, rebuild it. People are like crazy enthusiastic about it, right? It's not hard to get those smart people to come here. If you can pay them some money, like the kind of salary they would get in the Valley, $200,000-$300,000 a year, which is a lot of money here, but it's objectively for a government or corporation, it's not a lot of money. You can get the top expert to work with your startups locally. That's something to think about as well. Building technology centers for kids. I'm going to skip that because of time. So to wrap up, being a small country, new country, Singapore, which I just mentioned, was founded exactly 50 years ago today, right? So it's a very new country as well. Being a small country, poor country, doesn't really matter. It's actually much easier to turn around that than a big non-functioning country, right? So this is this kind of stuff we have to be doing together. I've spent 4 years trying to help people do that, both startups. I've advised a bunch of, corporations, governments, decision makers. We need to keep doing it. It's for the long haul, right? So think of it as a cathedral, right? Don't expect results too fast. I personally have the tendency to do that as well. I need to see results, but in reality, it's like building a cathedral, right? The people that start building cathedrals, they never live to see the end of it. And this is a famous example, the Sagrada Familia, still in construction. They started building it in the 1880s, right? With modern technology today, still not finished. Cologne Cathedral, was built for like 300-400 years, et cetera, et cetera. We need to do this. So it's a long time. We have to be patient. It's a lot of hard work. And on that, my name is Max. I thank you very much.